Welcome to the region's only public safety radio talk show. It's time again for the Sheriff's Report, your weekly radio call from Sheriff Ozzie, now in its third year on the air.
Radio base to the Sheriff. Come in, Sheriff.
And good morning, good afternoon, depending on what venue you're watching the Sheriff's Report today. Today, I'm going to talk about Initiative 1639, which was passed last fall by the voters of the state of Washington. And the reason I'm going to readdress this issue is because I just can't seem to have people not ask me a question about this on a daily basis. It's almost like some people have woken up after a hangover and gone, well, okay, exactly what did we do? 1639 was an initiative that was basically portrayed as a school safety type initiative. And it did certain things that a lot of people don't realize, and they're starting to realize exactly the ramifications of this particular initiative that was passed. This initiative had problems from the very beginning. If you take a look at its history, several courts in the state of Washington, the lower courts, said that this initiative should not be placed on the ballot because it was basically unlawful. It went all the way to the state Supreme Court, and our state Supreme Court proved that it is not a court that of review. It's a court of activism. We have a group of activist judges, because if they had actually ruled on the rule of law and the constitutionality of this initiative would never have been placed on the ballot. So people always ask me about judges and who to vote for on judges. I'm telling you, you need to pay attention to the Washington State Supreme Court. It is no longer a court that is doing its basic function, which is to ensure that the rule of law and the Constitution of the state of Washington is being followed. I-1639 was unconstitutional based on the state's constitutional from the very beginning. And for the Supreme Court to put this on the ballot was a great disservice to you, the citizen. If we take a look at some of the things that 1639 did, but before we go do that, let's take a look at what the initiative, the way it was worded. I got props that are running away on the table, just so hold on for a minute. 1639, as it was written and what you saw on the ballot, sounds fairly innocuous. It makes it sound as if the measure was designed to have increased background checks. It established some age limitations, established waiting periods on semi-automatic assault rifles. And we're just going to read the exact ballot language, and then we're going to break down exactly what was within the ballot. This measure requires increased background checks. Folks, I have no problems with background checks. We need to do the best that we can to ensure that the wrong people aren't getting weapons in their hands. We need to ensure that people that have felony convictions don't get weapons in their hands. We need to ensure that people that have mental health issues, severe mental health issues, do not get weapons in their hands. You're never going to hear me say that we shouldn't have background checks. We need background checks. It established training requirements. Well, we'll talk a little bit about what the training requirements are, and quite frankly, the hypocrisy of the people who actually were behind 1639 in reference to that. Age limitations. It basically stripped the rights of 18 to 21-year-olds to purchase an assault weapon. Um, Anybody under the age of 21 cannot purchase an assault weapon. It's the same as handgun laws within the state right now. It also criminalized non-compliant storage upon authorized use, upon unauthorized use. Here's the problem. They don't tell you what authorized storage is, and that they still to this day haven't done that. There are certain sections of this law that are going to have to go to what is basically a rulemaking committee, and then they'll decide what safe storage really is, and that's going to be problematic because no one's really defined what safe storage is, and depending on how they define it, could lead to further constitutional issues with 1639. It allows fees and enacts other provisions. How can you have a ballot measure that doesn't spell out exactly what all the provisions that are being talked about, even in the ballot language? Other provisions. Well, we'll talk a little bit about those other provisions. 1639 basically took the crux of the issue with 1639 is, and I'm just going to go right to the heart of it. 1639 was not about school safety. It wasn't. This does nothing to increase the safety of our neighborhoods or our schools as it's portrayed in the voter pamphlet. This is the Washington State voter pamphlet that was used. And the people that were for 1639 made statements that this was about school safety, and it really isn't. The crux of 1639 is they established the definition. Now, we've all heard of the term assault rifle, assault weapon. Well, folks, there's really no such thing. If there were such a thing, you would not have to establish a definition for it. It'd already be pre-established. 1639 established the definition of an assault weapon. That definition is very much all-inclusive in its meaning. It defines a semi-automatic assault rifle to mean any rifle, that's any rifle, which utilizes a portion of the energy of firing a cartridge to extract the fired cartridge case and chamber the next round, and which requires a separate pull of the trigger to fire each cartridge. So it's basically any semi-automatic rifle that we have. They portrayed this as trying to, the target was the AR-15. And that's the image that they used to, basically scare y'all into voting for 1639. But what they've done is they have made all semi-automatic rifles and assault weapons. And there's a reason that they did that, because if you take a look at our state attorney general's legislative agenda for this year, it's the ban of all semi-automatic weapons. And that is very clear. You can check it online. It's the ban of all semi-automatic weapons. That's his agenda. This is the individual who also wants to be the next governor of the state of Washington. So when you take a look at this established definition, all semi-automatic rifles are now assault weapons, assault rifles. There's a problem. And part of the argument that the anti-gun coalition uses is that, you know, we've never had access to these type of weapons, back when I was a kid. That's not true. We forget the history of our own country at times, and we allow people to tell us and dictate to us, and quite frankly, rewrite that history. The history of the weapons in the United States are very much pro because the Constitution of the United States established your right to have weapons. The NRA, and that's a organization that is greatly demonized, was started after the Civil War to ensure Americans were trained in the use of weapons because the North did so poorly in marksmanship. That's the truth. This organization was developed to ensure the American people could shoot. The government also has a program, the Civilian Marksmanship Program, in which they have released what they call military-grade weapons into the general public for years. Semi-automatic military-grade weapons for years. Probably for, if I remember right, for almost 100 years. Those military-grade weapons were given to the citizens of this country. You could purchase them. The M1 carbine, which is basically to give you a comparison, the AR-15 and the M1 carbine, very comparable semi-automatic weapons, both used military-wise, was released to the general public. The M1 Grand was released to the general public. Patton called the M1 Grand the greatest battlefield weapon ever made. The history of this country is that we have actually always had access to these type of weapons. So when they say that we haven't, we have. That's just the way it is because our country was based on certain rights, certain philosophies, certain principles, and we're trying to rewrite history here without taking a hard look at what we're truly doing. So I-1639 made every semi-automatic rifle an assault rifle. That means that the .22 rifle that I carried, or have carried since I was 15, 40 years now, is now an assault weapon. This right here is now an assault weapon, based on I-1639. This weapon, they say we've never had an accident. 40 years I've carried this thing. And this is now going to be a gun targeted for a gun ban. That's part of what we've done with I-1639. And tell me where that has anything to do with school safety. We did that trying to and this is the AR-15 right here. The AR-15 is another semi-automatic weapon. This one, I've chose it to show you specifically because it's probably the scariest looking AR that I could get my hands on right now. It's actually my duty weapon. And they say that there's no reason that anybody should own one of these. There's all kinds of reasons that people should own them or could own them. I do a lot of target shooting. This just happens to be my duty weapon, but I own several of these for target shooting. They are a self-defense weapon. There's all kinds of reasons, legitimate reasons, to own any type of weapon that we currently have on the market today. Are there weapons that we are not allowed to have? Yeah, there are. But we went after the AR-15, and we ended up catching every one of them. So the proponents also will tell you that the AR-15 is a very powerful caliber. It's really not. Um, the 22 that I've carried all my life, that is the round right here for the 22. This is the round for an AR-15. And that is the round for my hunting rifle. So if you take a look at across the board here, we have now made all these classifications because this one does come in semi-automatic also. All of these are now assault weapon calibers, but they really targeted this one, and they try to make it sound like this is a devastating. It's that one's much more devastating. The problem with I-1639 in multiple ways is, one, to start with, it's unconstitutional across the board. But other problems that it has is that it does not define what safe storage is. And that is very problematic for us. It dictated training. I'm all for training. Outstanding. I encourage people to get trained on proper weapon use. The hypocrisy, though, of those who were behind this measure is that they were the ones that actually drove some of the safety training out of our own schools. At one time, again, the organization that they demonize so much, the NRA, had school safety training classes. I was trained in hunter safety, and this is the other hypocrisy is, in order to go hunting in the state of Washington, or quite frankly any state, because in the state of Wyoming, where I took my hunter safety when I was 8 years old, we were trained in the use of weapons. We were trained on the impact of weapons. We were trained on, the safety, all the things that they want to cover here. In this, we were already trained. So they are mandating training that's been in place for years and years. They're mandating training that at one point we had in our schools before it got removed. So I would ask those who are in the anti-gun coalition to, decide one way or another. Do you want us to train people, or do you just want to demonize organizations and handguns and rifles? Because that seems to be what is going on here. I'm all for training. This law mandates that there will be basic firearms safety rules in that training. Firearms and children, and that's what they're supposed to train on, is to talk about firearms and children, including secure gun storage and talking to children about gun safety, firearms and suicide prevention, secure gun storage to prevent unauthorized access and use, safe handling of firearms, and state and federal firearms law to include prohibited firearms transfers. So 90% of this is already being trained in most of your basic hunting classes. So again, the training has been going on for a very long time. They'd make it sounds like that there's never been any training. There has been training for a very long time. I'm all for training. It will be interesting to see what happens when it comes out of the rulemaking committees of exactly who is going to be certified to give this training, or what training is going to be recognized in this training. The next thing that I-1639 talks about is that storage issue. Again, they have not determined exactly what that means. When the rulemaking committee comes out, they'll be sending us, because we've been tasked with part of this is to make sure that people are complying with this law, and this is going to be one of the hardest aspects there is of I-1639. The Constitution of the United States is fairly clear. You have the right to be secure in your home, your papers, and everything else. The Fourth Amendment's very clear. How are we in law enforcement supposed to make sure that everybody out there is complying with whatever gun storage rules they come up with? I can assure you, I'm not going to go into people's houses without a warrant. That is not happening. And I don't know how you're ever going to get to the point where that's going to be something that can be actually enforced. I kind of really am hoping that there's common sense used when they start talking about what we're supposed to do about that aspect. Mental health background checks is another thing that's brought up. I'm all for mental health background checks. This needs to definitely be a high priority. Some of the things that I think that will be a bottom line for I-1639 moving forward is this. A lot of people are really concerned about, how is this going to be enforced. Folks, I-1639 really didn't give law enforcement too much to worry about as far as enforcement. It dictated that people from 18 to 21 can't purchase a assault rifle. We don't enforce that. It will be the safe storage issues and the crimes that come out of it, because if somebody gets a hold of one of your guns and they're not authorized to have that gun, then you could end up being charged with a felony or misdemeanor depending on what happens with the gun. Again, we need to find out how they're going to define safe storage. One aspect I think I should cover on I-1639 is this. People from 18 to 21 can possess an assault weapon. They just can't purchase them. Now, you're probably going, wait a minute, yes, they can still possess them. There are certain aspects to that, in that you can possess that weapon in your house, in your place of business, and for certain authorized uses like target shooting, things like that. It's the same as a handgun. People from 18 to 21 can possess a handgun under those same criteria. There's a lot of people that are really worried about I-1639. I-1639 is being challenged in court. It will ultimately be found to be unconstitutional. It flies in the face of the Hellier decision the Supreme Court made in 2008. So I'm not too concerned about I-1639. The thing that worries me about I-1639 is it was not about school safety. It wasn't about any of all these other things that we've talked about. It was about getting a definition tagged on all semi-automatic weapons. Those semi-automatic guns became assault weapons, and the next step is, according to the agenda of our state attorney general, is to ban all assault weapons. That is the next phase of this. So if you're really concerned about this, it's not your sheriff and your police chief that you need to be calling or emailing on a constant daily basis. It is your state representatives. You need to make sure that you have that contact with them to make sure that they understand that you are not for banning semi-automatic hunting weapons, because that's basically what's going to happen here. That's the avenue that you need to talk about. Folks, there are fine lines that we talk about on a daily basis. Our job is to enforce the laws of the state of Washington and the United States. We took an oath to support the Constitution and the laws of the United States. We took an oath to support the Constitution of the state of Washington and the laws of the state of Washington. If those laws are unconstitutional, they can't be enforced. Our founding fathers gave us a process to go through. It is going through that process. I-1639 is being challenged in court. It will be up to the courts to determine the fate of the constitutionality of this issue. Until then, there's nothing really for you, the citizen, to really worry about as far as I-1639, because there's nothing that law enforcement really has to enforce except for the safe storage aspect, and I can't tell you how that's going to work until they come up with definitions. If it's against the Constitution, it won't be enforced. It's just that simple. The Fourth Amendment makes that very, very clear. You have the right to be secure in your homes, your papers, and your possessions. I hope that this wasn't too disjunctive. I wanted to talk about this because I have to talk about it on a daily basis. And I wanted you to also realize that sometimes when things are on a ballot, you really need to think about what we're doing. This was not about school safety. That at the end of the ballot where it says and other provisions, those other provisions were the definition that they created that now has a hunting rifle that I have used for 40 years listed as an assault rifle. That was that other provision. I'm all for background checks. We need background checks. Training, I think everybody should have training. How you're going to tell somebody how to store something, I'm waiting to see how that works out. The bottom line is you have avenues to address your government. You need to use the proper avenues to address your government. You can't expect people to violate their oath of office, and that is our job. Folks, I hope you have a great weekend. This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezowicz with the Sheriff's Report. Have a great day.
The Sheriff's Report is a joint production of Spokane Talks Media and KTW 630 AM and 96.5 FM, which are solely responsible for its content. Ask a question, recommend a guest, or watch this program again anytime at SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Have a safe day.